In a distant corner of the galaxy, war and conflict were common. But there was one species that stood above all others, the Izar. Known for their warrior code and unmatched strength, the Izar were feared throughout the galaxy. Their soldiers, dressed in intricate and powerful armor, carried the pride of their people. One such soldier, Zila, was a rising star among them. She had trained her entire life to be the best, and nothing had ever shaken her belief in her people's superiority. Zayla had been given a new mission: track down and eliminate a human rebel leader, a man known only as Ethan. His reputation for defying the odds and challenging the power of the Izar was legendary. Zayla was chosen for this task because of her sharp instincts, ruthless skills, and unmatched focus. As she landed on the desolate planet where Ethan was last seen, Zayla's senses sharpened. She could feel the tension in the air. This was a world of dust and sand, where the only sounds were the wind and the occasional crack of stone. There was no sign of life, yet she knew Ethan was close. Her armor, designed to blend with the surroundings and give her a tactical advantage, was perfectly suited for this kind of environment. Zayla had tracked countless enemies before, and all had fallen before her. This would be no different. Or so she thought. Her mission was clear: find Ethan, eliminate him, and return to the Izar stronghold with the success of her mission. Yet as she walked through the barren landscape, her thoughts began to drift. There was something unsettling about this mission. The Izar had long considered humans to be inferior, weak creatures who would eventually be wiped out or brought to heel. But Ethan was different. He had led a group of rebels who challenged the Izar, defied their power, and even won battles that should have been impossible. Zayla tried to push these thoughts aside. She had a job to do, and that was all that mattered. As she moved further into the planet's rocky hills, her eyes caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow, quick and silent. Her instincts kicked in immediately. She was ready. In the distance, Ethan appeared from behind a crumbling rock formation. He didn't run. He didn't even seem surprised to see her. Instead, he stood there, as calm as could be, staring at her with steady eyes. There was a quiet strength about him that Zayla had not expected. "Ethan," she called out, her voice clear and cold. "You are a traitor to your people. Surrender now, and I'll make your death quick." Ethan didn't flinch. "You really don't understand, do you?" His voice was soft, but firm. "I'm not the one who needs to surrender." Zayla's grip on her weapon tightened. "You're a fool to think you can stand against the Izar. Your people will fall." Ethan's eyes softened for a moment, and Zayla noticed something strange. There was no fear in his gaze. It was as if he had already accepted his fate. This only made Zayla more determined. She couldn't let a human stand in her way. She took a step forward, her boots crunching on the gravel beneath her. "You will die here," she said, her voice low and threatening. But Ethan simply shook his head. "I won't fight you," he said calmly, "but I won't run either." Zayla paused. This was unexpected. No human, especially not one who had led a rebellion, would ever show such calm in the face of certain death. She studied him more closely. Ethan was not wearing the usual human armor. Instead, he wore simple, worn clothes. His hands were not trembling, and his posture was relaxed. This only made Zayla more curious. "You talk of peace, but your kind is too weak to understand it," she said sharply. "The Izar will destroy anyone who stands in their way." Ethan's expression didn't change, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Maybe we're not the ones who need to understand it," he said quietly. "Maybe it's the ones with the power that need to listen." Zayla felt a strange pang in her chest. Her hand gripped her weapon even tighter, but something was different. The anger, the certainty that had always fueled her before, seemed to falter. It wasn't just that Ethan wasn't afraid. It was that he was trying to show her something beyond what she had been taught. For the first time, Zayla felt a crack in her belief that humans were nothing more than obstacles. She quickly brushed it aside. Focus, she told herself. He is the enemy. He must be eliminated. But as Zayla stepped forward, something unexpected happened. The intricate plates of her armor, built for strength, precision, and complete protection, began to shift. At first, she thought it was a malfunction, but then she realized that something was wrong. The armor wasn't just malfunctioning, it was reacting to her emotions, her confusion. The armor's systems, designed to keep her focused and strong, were weakening. The armor that had always been a part of her, an extension of her strength, was falling away piece by piece. This is not possible, she thought. She looked down in shock as the first pieces of her armor clattered to the ground. It wasn't just a technical failure. It was as if the armor had a mind of its own, rejecting her as much as she rejected Ethan's words. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure of what to do next. Ethan watched her, his gaze calm but unwavering. "It's not proper," Zayla whispered to herself, her voice barely audible as more of her armor fell away. This shouldn't be happening, but it was happening. And Zayla knew deep down that this moment would change everything. Zayla stood, motionless, as the last of her armor clattered to the ground. Her mind raced, struggling to understand what was happening. The once unbreakable armor that symbolized her power and strength was now nothing more than discarded metal at her feet. The weight of it was gone, and with it, her confidence seemed to slip away. Ethan, standing across from her, hadn't moved. He simply watched her, his expression calm and steady. Zayla's heart beat faster in her chest, but it wasn't from the battle. It was from something else, something she had never felt before: fear, uncertainty, confusion. She tried to gather herself to return to the task at hand, but her mind refused to focus. She had always relied on her training and her armor to protect her, to give her control. Without it, she felt exposed, vulnerable. It was a feeling she had never allowed herself to experience. She stepped back, her boots crunching against the dust, her eyes never leaving Ethan. He was still standing there, his hands at his sides, offering no threat. Zayla couldn't understand why he hadn't attacked. He should have. A human rebel leader, trained to fight, should have seen her vulnerability and struck, but instead, he remained calm. "Why don't you fight?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. The words felt strange coming from her mouth. She was a warrior, and yet here she was, asking a question she never thought she'd need to ask. Ethan's eyes softened, and for the first time, Zayla saw something in them that she didn't expect understanding. "Fighting won't solve anything. It's not the way forward," he said quietly. Zayla blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer despite herself. Her instincts told her to be on guard, to prepare for a fight, but instead her curiosity grew stronger than her anger. "Your people, they believe in strength, in power. But that kind of strength leads to more fighting, more destruction. We can't keep living this way," Ethan explained. "There's another way, one where we don't have to fight to survive." Zayla took another step closer, this time without thinking. The words were like a puzzle she couldn't solve. She had been trained her entire life to believe that strength was everything, that power ruled the galaxy. It was the Izar way. And now, here was a human, a species she had been taught to regard as weak and beneath her, telling her that strength wasn't the answer. Her hand instinctively moved to her waist, but the weapon that was usually strapped there was no longer there. It felt wrong, and for a brief moment she felt exposed without it. The feeling was strange. She had always been ready for any threat, any danger, but now, with Ethan standing so calmly before her, she wasn't sure what to do next. "Why are you so calm?" Zayla asked, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability. She had never allowed anyone to see her like this before. She had never been unsure, never questioned her purpose or her mission. But now, as she stood here, everything felt different. Ethan's calmness, his willingness to talk, his refusal to fight. It was all so strange to her. "I've seen too much fighting," Ethan said. "I've watched my people suffer because of it, and I've watched others like you waste their lives in endless battles. It doesn't have to be this way." Zayla's mind was in turmoil. The words he spoke made sense, but at the same time they went against everything she had ever known. Her training, her culture, her very identity had been built around the idea that power was the only way to achieve peace. She had never questioned it. Until now. "You want peace?" Zayla asked, almost mocking him. "You think peace can come from standing idle, doing nothing?" Ethan's gaze never wavered. "No. Peace doesn't come from doing nothing. But it doesn't come from fighting either. It comes from understanding each other, from working together. We don't have to keep fighting forever." Zayla shook her head. This wasn't how things worked. She had been raised to believe that there was only one way to ensure victory, and it was through strength. But Ethan wasn't talking about strength. He was talking about something else, something softer. It felt wrong to her. It felt weak. For the first time in her life, Zayla felt torn. Her entire identity had been built on the belief that power and strength would bring her victory. She had never considered that there might be another way, a way where fighting didn't have to be the answer. The thought felt alien to her. And yet, as she stood there, staring at Ethan, she began to feel something else, something she had never allowed herself to feel. Doubt. Was it possible that he was right? Could there really be a future where fighting wasn't the solution, where she didn't have to prove her strength through violence? Zayla took another step back, her mind racing. She needed to think, to process what was happening. But there was something about Ethan's presence that was making it hard to think clearly. His words were like a beacon, pulling her away from everything she had been taught. "I don't understand," Zayla said, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan took a step toward her. "That's okay. You don't have to understand right now. But maybe, just maybe, we can find another way. Together." Zayla didn't know what to say. Her armor, her strength, had always been a part of who she was. But now, as it lay broken at her feet, she realized that it wasn't enough. Maybe there was more to life than just fighting. Maybe there was something she had been missing all along. As she looked into Ethan's eyes, something shifted within her. A new path lay before her, one she had never considered. And for the first time, Zayla wondered if it was the path she was meant to follow. Zayla stood still, her eyes fixed on Ethan, trying to make sense of the words he had spoken. She had always believed that power was the key to survival. Strength had always been her guide, her protection, and her identity. But now, with the remnants of her armor scattered around her feet, Zayla felt naked, exposed. It was a sensation she had never experienced before. Her heart raced, and for a moment she felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. The warrior within her wanted to fight, to destroy, to prove that she was right. But another part of her, the part that had been quiet for so long, was listening to Ethan's words. She had never heard anything like them before. Ethan's gaze was steady, and his voice remained calm. "You don't have to carry the weight of your people's beliefs alone. You don't have to fight for the wrong reasons." Zayla wanted to argue, to tell him that his way was impossible, that peace was nothing more than a dream. But she couldn't. There was something in his voice, something in the way he stood before her, that made it hard for her to dismiss him. She had always been taught that weakness was to be feared, but now, in front of Ethan, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known. "Why are you doing this?" Zayla asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why aren't you afraid?" Ethan took a step closer, but he didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, he spoke softly. "I'm not afraid because I believe in something more. I believe that we can change, that we don't have to live in fear of each other. I believe that if we understand each other, we can build a future without all the fighting." Zayla's mind struggled to grasp his words. How could she trust someone who had led a rebellion? Someone who had been part of the very thing she had been taught to fight against. She had been raised to see humans as weak, as a species that needed to be controlled. Yet here she was, feeling the weight of her own doubts for the first time. She glanced down at the broken pieces of her armor. Her armor had always been her shield, the one thing that kept her safe from the world. But now, without it, she felt raw and vulnerable. The thought scared her more than anything else. How could she fight without it? How could she protect herself? Zayla stepped back, her thoughts racing. "I've been trained to fight, to win. It's all I know," she said, her voice filled with confusion. "I don't know how to live without it." Ethan didn't answer right away. He just watched her, his expression softening. "You don't have to fight to be strong, Zayla," he said, his voice gentle. "Strength isn't about how much power you have. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to let go. It's about realizing that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose peace over war." Zayla looked at him, searching his face for any hint of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. She had never met someone like him before, someone who could speak of peace in a way that made her feel like it was possible. It was a strange feeling, one she wasn't sure she liked. "I don't know how to let go," Zayla whispered, more to herself than to him. "All I've ever known is how to fight." Ethan nodded, as if he understood her struggle. "It's not easy. It takes time. But you can start by trusting yourself. You don't need to hide behind your armor anymore. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. Not to me. Not to anyone." Zayla felt her chest tighten. The thought of standing without her armor, without her walls, was terrifying. But deep, inside, she knew he was right. Her armor had always been a mask, a way to keep others at a distance. It had kept her safe, yes, but it had also kept her isolated. She had never allowed herself to truly connect with anyone, and now, for the first time, she was wondering if that was the reason she felt so empty inside. Ethan reached out, his hand offering nothing but the promise of understanding. Zayla hesitated, her hand hovering by her side, unsure of what to do. She had spent so long keeping people at arm's length, guarding herself from any kind of vulnerability. But now, in front of this human who somehow made her feel like there was a possibility for something more, she was starting to question everything. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Zayla's mind was still, spinning, caught between the weight of her past and the promise of something new. But slowly, almost without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, one that felt strange and foreign, but at the same time, it was the most freeing thing she had ever done. For the first time in her life, Zayla didn't feel like she had to fight to survive. She didn't have to carry the burden of her people's beliefs anymore. In that moment, all she had to do was trust. Ethan gave her a small, reassuring smile, and Zayla felt something inside her shift. The warrior she had been, the person who had believed that strength meant power, was slowly starting to fade. In its place, a new version of herself was emerging. Someone who was ready to embrace vulnerability, to embrace peace. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Zayla admitted softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "You don't have to be," Ethan replied. You can take it one step at a time. Zayla nodded, feeling the weight of her doubts slowly begin to lift. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than fighting. And maybe, with Ethan's help, she could learn to find out. Zayla stood beside Ethan, her hand still resting in his, as they both stood amidst the barren landscape. The remnants of her armor lay scattered on the ground, nothing more than useless fragments of her former strength. She felt exposed, both physically and emotionally. The weight of her armor had always been a comfort, a shield that protected her from the world, but now, without it, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Ethan didn't speak. He simply stood next to her, as if giving her the time she needed to gather her thoughts. The air around them was quiet, almost still, and the tension from their earlier confrontation had faded. There was a calmness between them now, a sense of understanding that hadn't been there before. Zayla couldn't explain it, but she felt it, the shift, the change, the pull of something new, something she had never allowed herself to feel. As the silence stretched on, Zayla glanced at Ethan. She had been taught to fear humans, to see them as weak and insignificant. But Ethan wasn't weak. Far from it. He had stood up against the Izar, defied them, and led others in their fight for something better. He was a leader just as much as she was, and yet, unlike her, he seemed at peace. He didn't need armor to hide behind. He didn't need to prove his strength through violence or power. He had found something different, something she hadn't known she was missing. Zayla couldn't help but feel drawn to that quiet strength within him. She had always thought strength came from power, from the ability to fight and conquer. But here she was, standing next to someone who had shown her that true strength came from understanding, from the willingness to listen and to change. It was a truth that was hard for her to accept, but it was there, undeniable. I've spent my entire life believing that strength was everything, Zayla said, breaking the silence. Her voice was quiet, almost unsure. I thought that power, control, and fear were the only things that could keep me safe. Ethan turned to her, his expression soft but firm. I understand. It's hard to see beyond the walls we build around ourselves, to imagine that there might be another way. But you don't need to hide behind your armor anymore, Zayla. You don't need to fight to prove your worth. Zayla shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. But if I don't fight, then what do I do? How do I survive in a galaxy like this one? Ethan smiled gently. Survival isn't just about fighting. It's about finding a way to live without causing more pain, more destruction. It's about choosing peace over war, understanding over hatred. Zayla felt a knot form in her chest. Peace. The word felt foreign to her, almost impossible. She had spent her life fighting for survival, for dominance, for the belief that only the strongest should lead. The idea of peace seemed like an illusion, something unattainable, especially for someone like her. I don't know if I can do this, Zayla admitted. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. I don't know how to let go of everything I've been taught. How can I just stop fighting? Ethan's gaze softened, and he took a step closer to her. You don't have to do it all at once. It's not about changing everything in one day. It's about starting with small steps, one moment at a time. You've already taken the first step by being here, by listening, by questioning. Zayla looked down at her hands, still holding Ethan's. She had never thought about it like that before. Small steps, one moment at a time. The idea was almost comforting, though it felt strange to consider. What if I fail? She asked quietly. What if I can't change? What if I go back to the way I was before? Ethan gently squeezed her hand. Everyone has doubts. Everyone fears failure. But the real failure is never trying. You're not alone in this, Zayla. You have the power to choose your path, to decide who you want to be. Zayla's heart raced as his words sank in. She had always been told that failure was the end, that weakness was something to be ashamed of. But Ethan wasn't treating her like she was weak. He was treating her like she had the power to change, like she could still make a difference. For the first time, Zayla felt a sense of hope. It was a fragile feeling, one that she wasn't sure she could trust, but it was there. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to hide behind the walls she had built around herself. Ethan's words continued to echo in her mind. It's not about fighting to survive. It's about living in a way that doesn't hurt others. She had always thought that being strong meant being unbreakable, but now, standing here with Ethan, she realized that true strength might lie in something else, something far less certain, but far more meaningful. The ability to change, to adapt, to embrace peace instead of war. Zayla felt her chest tighten as the weight of it all settled over her. It was a lot to process, and the fear of letting go still gnawed at her. But there was also something else, a sense of possibility, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story. This could be the beginning of something new. "I'm scared," Zayla said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I'm scared of what happens if I choose peace. What happens if I fail?" Ethan's smile grew, and he stepped back slightly, giving her space, but still offering his support. "It's okay to be scared, but don't let fear control you. It's the fear of staying the same, of never changing, that's the real enemy." Zayla stood there, looking at Ethan, his words slowly sinking in. For the first time, she felt like she had a choice, a real choice. She didn't have to be the person the Izar had trained her to be. She didn't have to keep fighting. She could choose a different path, and maybe, just maybe, it was a path worth taking. Zayla stood still, her mind a storm of thoughts. She couldn't ignore the shift she felt within herself. The words, Ethan, had spoken continued to echo in her mind, each one a reminder of the path she had once walked and the one she was now considering. Her grip on her own identity was loosening, and the fear of what that meant held her in place. She glanced down at the broken pieces of her armor. The once impenetrable shield that had defined her was now a pile of discarded metal. The armor had always been a symbol of her strength. Zayla took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so much of my life believing that strength came from power, from fear. I've never known another way." Ethan looked at her with understanding, his eyes gentle. "You've been taught to believe that. But you're not bound by those lessons anymore. You have the strength to decide for yourself." Zayla closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She had always thought that her strength was her greatest asset, that it was the one thing that would keep her safe in the galaxy. But now, with everything she had known falling away, she realized that her strength was not in her armor or her ability to fight. It was in her capacity to change. For the first time, Zayla felt the walls she had built around herself start to crumble. It wasn't the fear of losing her strength that bothered her. It was the fear of what would replace it. What if she chose this new path, this path of peace and understanding, and failed? What if she wasn't strong enough to walk away from the battle? Zayla turned to face Ethan, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but there was none. His expression was calm, unwavering. "How do you know it will work?" she asked. "How do you know that peace can be achieved? My people, they've been at war for so long. They don't know anything else." Ethan stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Peace isn't something that happens overnight. It's a choice we make every day. It's about learning to understand each other, to put down our weapons and open our hearts. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it starts with a single step, and that step is the most important one. Zayla felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had been taught to fight for everything, to never back down, to never show weakness. But here she was, considering a future that was completely different from everything she had ever known. The thought was terrifying and freeing at the same time. For the first time in her life, Zayla allowed herself to question her training, her beliefs, and everything she had been taught. She realized that the very things that had once made her strong, her armor, her fear, her anger, were the same things that had kept her from understanding the truth. And the truth she now saw was that peace was possible, but it had to start with her. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Zayla said, her voice filled with doubt. "I don't know if I can let go of everything I've been. I don't know if I can be the person you're asking me to be." Ethan smiled gently, as if he understood her fear completely. "You don't have to be anyone other than yourself. You're not changing into someone else, Zayla. You're simply choosing a new way to live. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be willing to try." Zayla felt a knot in her stomach loosen at his words. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to be the perfect warrior or the perfect leader. All she had to do was take one step forward. "Just one step, Em. I'll try," Zayla said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I don't know how, but I'll try." Ethan's smile widened, and for a brief moment, Zayla felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't the peace of certainty, but it was a peace she had never known before. It was the peace of knowing that, for the first time, she had a choice. "I'm with you, Zayla," Ethan said softly. "We're in this together." Zayla nodded, her heart still racing, but this time with hope. She had taken the first step, and that was all she needed to move forward. Zayla stood at the edge of a small camp, looking out across the horizon as the first light of dawn broke over the distant mountains. The night had been long and full of questions, but now, as the new day began, she felt something different, something she hadn't expected. There was hope, real hope. Ethan sat nearby, quietly watching her, his calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos she had lived with for so long. Zayla had come to trust him in ways she never thought possible. He had shown her a side of herself she didn't know existed, a side that could choose peace, that could choose understanding. And though the journey ahead would be difficult, she knew now that she wasn't alone. For so long, Zayla had seen the galaxy through the eyes of a soldier. Everything was a battle, every moment a test of strength. But now, standing here with Ethan, she understood that there was more to life than conflict. There was something more meaningful, something she had never allowed herself to see before: connection. As the morning sun warmed the earth, Zayla took a deep breath. She felt the weight of her old beliefs still lingering within her, but now, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a challenge, one that she was ready to face. The path she had chosen wasn't an easy one, but it was her path, and that was what mattered. Ethan had been patient with her, understanding her doubts and allowing her to take her time. He had never pushed her to make a decision, never demanded that she change overnight. He had simply shown her another way, one that didn't rely on fear, on fighting, or on being the strongest. It was about learning to listen, to understand, and to find a way to work together for a better future. "Do you ever regret it?" Zayla asked, her voice quiet but full of meaning. Ethan turned to face her, a soft smile on his lips. "Regret? What?" he asked. "Choosing peace. Choosing something other than what we've always known," Zayla replied, her eyes searching his face for any hint of uncertainty. Ethan thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. I've seen the consequences of endless fighting. I've seen what happens when we don't choose another way. Regret isn't about the path we choose. It's about not choosing anything at all. And right now, I'm choosing hope. Zayla nodded, his words resonating with her. For so long, she had believed that hope was a luxury, something weak, something that could be easily crushed by the reality of war. But now, she saw that hope was the very thing that could lead to change. It wasn't a dream. It was a force. And it was powerful. She turned away from the horizon, looking at the camp where the others were preparing for the journey ahead. The rebels she had once seen as enemies now seemed like allies, even friends. She had begun to understand their cause, to see that their fight wasn't just about destruction. It was about building something new, something that could bring people together instead of tearing them apart. Zayla knew she still had much to learn. She knew that the road ahead would be full of obstacles, and that her old training, the way she had been raised, would make it difficult to break free from her past. But she also knew that she had already made the hardest decision of all. She had chosen a different path. And that path led to something better, something worth fighting for. "Do you think the others will follow us?" Zayla asked, her voice uncertain but filled with hope. Ethan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think they will. They'll follow us, because we're not asking them to fight. We're asking them to believe in something new, something better." Zayla nodded, but a part of her still felt uneasy. She had always been a warrior. She had always been trained to lead through strength, through force. But now, she was learning that leadership wasn't just about power. It was about showing others the way, even when the path was unclear. It was about guiding them through uncertainty, just as Ethan had guided her. "We're ready," Ethan said, standing up and gathering his things. "The journey ahead won't be easy, but we'll face it together." Zayla stood as well, her heart filled with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. She had made a choice, and that choice was the first step toward something better. As she walked toward the camp, the others looked up at her. She saw no fear in their eyes, no judgment, just acceptance. They had all chosen this path together, and together they would face whatever came next. Zayla glanced at Ethan, who gave her a reassuring nod. She smiled back, feeling the weight of her past slowly lift from her shoulders. The warrior she had once been was still there, but she had changed. She had become something more. For the first time, Zayla felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of certainty or comfort. It was the peace of knowing that she had the power to choose her future, and that was all she needed. As the group set off on their journey, Zayla walked alongside Ethan, her steps lighter than they had ever been. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a road she was ready to walk. With hope in her heart and the strength to change, Zayla knew that she was no longer the person she had been. She was someone new, and that new person had the power to create a future full of peace, understanding, and unity. The days that followed were full of change, and Zayla could feel it with every step she took. What had once been a clear path of duty and strength had become something different. A path that required her to think not with the mind of a soldier, but with the heart of a leader. It wasn't easy, and at times, the old habits tried to pull her back. But with every new challenge, she grew stronger, more sure of her decision to walk this new road. She and Ethan had led the small group of rebels across many planets, sharing their message of peace and understanding. They were not asking for surrender. They were not asking for submission. They were asking for change, real, meaningful change. And they were beginning to see the first signs that it was working. Zayla had seen the effect their words had on people. The soldiers who once stood against them now hesitated, their weapons lowered in quiet defiance. The leaders who had once seen her as nothing more than an enemy now listened, willing to have the conversation they had never dared before. The realization came slowly, but it was there. The galaxy was ready for something different. Zayla had often wondered if she would be able to keep her promise to herself, to choose peace over war. It had been a struggle, and there were times when it seemed impossible. But now, as she walked through the streets of a city she had once hoped to conquer, she saw the change. It wasn't just the streets or the people, though. It was in her, too. The warrior she had been was still there, but she wasn't the same. She didn't need to be. Standing at the front of a gathering of new allies, Zayla felt the weight of her journey settle in her chest. It had been long, and it had been hard, but they had reached this point together. She wasn't leading a rebellion anymore. She was helping to build something new, something lasting. Ethan stood beside her, his eyes full of quiet confidence. She had learned so much from him, about patience, about understanding, and most importantly, about trust. He had shown her that true strength didn't come from fighting battles. It came from standing firm in what was right and choosing to do, the hard work of building a future. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever. Today marks the beginning of something important, Zayla said, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. The people of this city, a city that had once been a battleground, were now gathered to hear her speak. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but there was something else there too, something hopeful. She continued, "This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. We can't change everything in one day, but we can take the first step, and together we will walk that path." The crowd was silent for a moment before a soft murmur of agreement began to rise. Zayla's heart swelled. It wasn't just her voice that had brought them here. It was the shared belief in something better. They had all chosen this path, together. Ethan stepped forward, his voice joining hers. "What we've started here doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to all of us, to every individual who has chosen a better way. It belongs to every person who believes in unity over division, in peace over violence." Zayla glanced at him, her heart full. The words he spoke had always held meaning, but now, standing beside him, they held an even deeper truth. This was their shared dream. This was the future they were building together. In the weeks that followed, more and more people joined them. Some were former soldiers, like Zayla, who had been trained to fight for a cause they no longer believed in. Others were leaders from across the galaxy who had watched in silence, unsure of where to stand. But now, they were all united in their shared vision. They wanted peace. They wanted understanding. They wanted a future where the cycle of violence no longer dictated their lives. Zayla had once been afraid of what it would mean to let go of her old self. But now, she knew that she hadn't lost anything. She had gained something far more important, a chance to create a new legacy, not as a warrior, but as a guide, a leader who would help others find their way to peace. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Zayla stood with Ethan in front of the city they had helped to transform. The streets were filled with people, all of them going about their lives without the constant threat of war hanging over them. Zayla's heart felt light, and for the first time, she felt at peace. "I never thought I would see this day," Zayla said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I never thought we could change things this much." Ethan smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Zayla. We did it. Together." Zayla looked around at the people who had once been her enemies, who had now become her allies. She saw the children playing in the streets, the families sitting together, the traders exchanging goods without fear of conflict. The change had been slow, but it had been real. "We've only just begun," Zayla said, her voice full of quiet confidence. "But it's enough. It's enough to know that we're on the right path. As the stars began to fill the sky, Zayla stood with Ethan, surrounded by the people who had made this journey possible. It was no longer a world filled with conflict. It was a world where peace was beginning to take root. Zayla had once believed that the only way to survive was through strength and war, but now she knew better. The greatest strength came from choosing peace. The greatest power came from choosing to walk a different path. And that was the legacy she would leave behind. A world where strength was no longer measured by the number of battles won, but by the courage to choose peace over war, to choose unity over division. A world where people, no matter their past, could walk forward together into a new future.